Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here in Oxford and to give a physician's perspective on the role of food quality in particular, rather than food quantity, but food quality on human health. I think it is relevant to reveal that I'm a Director of Human Health and a significant shareholder in Devonish Nutrition, which is an agri-technology company which works in the One Health space, solving or providing solutions towards providing nutritious food in an environmentally friendly way. We've already discussed this morning that the challenge of this century is to feed a growing population. We're going to hit 10 billion by 2050 with nutritious food. And I'm not sure that many people in this room will welcome this comment, but I think the Eat Lancet Commission reference diet, which was published in the Lancet in January of last year, actually has provoked a discussion and an awareness of the link between environment and human health. Now, what they suggested was that we would move from the panel on the left-hand side of the screen, which is the UK Eat Well Guide, which is very, very similar to the nutritional guidelines worldwide, certainly in the developed world, that we would eat about a third of plant-based food or of fruit and vegetables, about a third of cereals, and just under a third of animal-sourced foods. And that we would move to a doubling of fruit, vegetables, legumes, and nuts. And that we would halve animal-sourced foods, both meat and dairy, and that there will be a 90% reduction in red meat consumption. That provoked multiple headlines throughout 2019. Now, most of the headlines actually did say that we were to slash red meat consumption because it was causing catastrophic damage to the planet, and we needed to eat more plants to save the planet. However, the public uptake on it was that not only was red meat damaging to the planet, but it also was damaging to human health. Is that true? This is an April Lancet publication. These are figures from the April Lancet publication. And Christopher Murray is the senior author. He also was a senior author on the Eat Lancet reference diet publication. And both within this publication, which looks at nutritional risk factors, and firstly I should say nutritional risk factors are really important. They've taken over from cigarette smoking in causing deaths and disease burden as measured by DALYs, disability adjusted life years. And both deaths that are caused by risk factors and DALYs are important. Deaths because it's the end, DALYs because disease burden is actually what causes misery to the human population, and also is what costs both individuals and governments money by use of healthcare resources. So in this April publication, they looked at 15 top nutritional risk factors, and they ranked them in order. And you can see that diets low in grains, high in sodium, high in salt, and diets that are deficient in fruit, vegetables, nuts and seeds, and omega-3 polyunsaturated acids top the list. Diets excessive in red meat were only responsible for less than 0.5% of those deaths and DALYs. And we need to look at it a little bit closer. This is the data whereby that database was created. This is a meta-analysis that looks at red meat consumption and all-cause mortality. At the bottom, there's a diamond which summarizes the results of all 7 studies. And you can see that there's a statistically insignificant 9% increase in deaths caused by red meat. But there's considerable disparity between the 7 studies. There's 5 studies which indicate that red meat causes more deaths than it prevents, because the boxes and the lines are to the right of the line of unity. In all 5 studies, the excessive red meat consumption was eating red meat more than once a day, so more than 7 times a week. Whereas the 2 studies that I've outlined in green, they compared populations where the excessive red meat consumption was, or the greater red meat consumption, was eating red meat twice to 5 times per week, with eating it once a week or less than that, 0. And in fact, red meat in moderation appears to be protective of human health. Red meat is a very balanced food. It has a balanced amino acid composition, and it's rich in micronutrients, including vitamins and important minerals such as iron, zinc, and selenium. In the April publication, in fact, iron deficiency was left out as an important nutritional risk factor. I've put it back in from the same database, and you can see that it certainly causes a lot of disease burden, fatigue, sarcopenia, and in particular, poor development of children. Here are 2 world maps on the left-hand side of the figure. The top map indicates the prevalence of childhood stunting in the first 5 years of life. Childhood stunting is not only a body stunting or a reduction in height of children, it also is associated with severe brain maldevelopment and a limitation of the potential for these children in future life, condemned to poor academic performance, lesser career opportunities, and lesser ability to support their families in the future. The bottom map indicates who eats the most meat. And you can see that actually there's a very close correlation between those countries where less meat is eaten in Africa and Asia and the greater than 30% prevalence of childhood stunting. So that's 1 in 3 children that are born in those countries that suffer with childhood stunting. This is summarized in the right-hand plot, where you can see meat consumption per capita, kilograms per capita throughout the year. And you can see it's an inverse relationship between the amount of meat that is eaten on average within a country and the levels of childhood stunting. Now, this is an association, and many of those countries suffer from deprivations in other ways other than a lack of meat intake. They also eat less food in general and a lesser range of fruit and vegetables, less hygiene, more infections. So we need to look at randomized controlled trials. And there's really very few. It's very difficult to do these kind of trials. But I think we should pay attention to this Kenyan study that was conducted by Harvard researchers. Over 2 years or 18 months, they actually randomized school children to eating to getting no additional food, to getting a vegetable stew daily within the school, to getting vegetable plus milk, and to getting vegetable plus meat. And they looked at the end of the 5 semesters, what were the test scores? There was a difference. They looked at a range of tests, so arithmetic, English, their national languages, geography, science, and arts. In general, you can see the darkest box, the meat group, scored best. And the accumulated total, there was a 20% difference on average in school scores in these 7, 8, and 9-year-olds. Also recommended by the Lancet reference diet was a halving of dairy intake. But in actual fact, the Lancet researchers were already clear that milk and calcium deficiencies causes deaths and causes diseases. This has been confirmed by a recent large prospective urban and rural study, the PURE study, published again in the Lancet. And you can see in the figures, I'll just look at the bottom figure of major cardiovascular disease. And you can see that the comparison group is eating less than 0.5 servings per day of dairy produce. Compare that with eating at least 2 servings per day. There's a 25% reduction in major cardiovascular disease and in total mortality in those that are eating at least 2 portions a day of dairy. So should we halve it and go down to a maximum of 1 portion a day? Interestingly, the data are most strong for whole-fat dairy produce, and the relationship is weakened by low-fat dairy produce. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you in this room are actually eating according to the Eat Well guide? How many of you are eating at least 5 portions of fruit and vegetables most days of the week? And I actually will ask you to put your hands up. Okay, probably about 50%. Now, this is a very well-educated group. How many of you think that you're going to move to eating 10 portions of fruit and vegetables a day? Do we think that the major food transformation proposed by the Eat Lancet Commission is actually feasible on a UK basis and on a global basis? Do we think that our friends in the USA are going to reduce their meat consumption to that extent and increase their fruit and vegetables to that extent? If we rely on the Eat Lancet reference diet to solve our greenhouse gas emissions, we are going to have continued climate crisis. So we need to find other solutions. So my thoughts are, and there are a number of research proposals, that we should balance and optimize human nutrition and the carbon footprint. And we need to consider which is the best metric to use. The panel in the top right actually compares greenhouse gas emissions per 100 grams. And yes, meat and meat products come out worse than most greenhouse gas emissions. However, if we actually relate the greenhouse gas emissions to the number of calories in the right bottom panel, actually processed fruit and vegetables comes out worse than meat. And the best performer are sweets. This is a perverse outcome. These are empty calories and not nutritious. So my favorite is the suggestion that we look at nutritional density. And this is a variant, the nutritional density of 15 key nutrients per 100 kilocalories related to greenhouse gas emissions. And color-coded in that bottom left-hand panel are the types of foods. So you can see that fruits and vegetables or other foods do have low greenhouse gas emissions, but they're actually not as nutritionally dense as meat products, as illustrated, or as animal source products, illustrated by the purple circles. And have a look at the top circle with lots of greenhouse gas emissions that's very nutritionally dense. That's a veggie burger. Yes, it is nutritionally dense because they've combined extruded protein from a variety of legume products. Yes, it's nutritionally dense because they've added vitamins. However, it's at the cost of a massive increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And are they truly nutritious? And I'll come to the next slide. So my thoughts are we need to work on enhanced nutrition in combination with enhanced environmental protection. And my colleague and many others at this conference are going to discuss more about the enhanced environmental protection, management of soil fertility, management of silvoforestry, and reduction in methane emissions. I'm going to talk about enhanced nutrition and how what points we should consider. This slide shows a comparison of the nutritional quality of steak versus plant-based burgers that are available on the market, each for a 4-ounce quantity. They're very similar calories, a little bit less fat in the veggie burgers, but more carbohydrate. The big differences are a 4-fold increase in sodium in salt. And remember, salt excess is causing 100 times the number of deaths of red meat. They also have multiple additives which are designed to enhance demand, the sweet, salt, sweet spot. The rise in obesity has paralleled the rise of processed foods, so that in the developed world, the majority of calories are now derived from processed foods rather than fresh foods. And that's not good for our health. This study actually looked at 2 weeks of unlimited access to an ultra-processed diet and 2 weeks of access to a completely unprocessed diet, fresh foods. It was a randomized trial. They were matched for the offered calories, sugar, fat, fiber, and macronutrients. You can see that there's a 500 milligram or 500 kilocalorie difference in intake with the ultra-processed foods, and weight gain of 1 kilogram with the ultra-processed foods and weight loss of 1 kilogram with the unprocessed foods. This was only for 2 weeks, so a 2 kilogram difference on average in 20 people. Interestingly, the cost of the ultra-processed diet was £100 per week. The cost of the unprocessed diet was £150 per week. it is much cheaper to eat calorie-rich, additive-rich processed foods and stimulate obesity. We do need to consider the quality of the food that we eat, both the plant-based foods and the animal-sourced foods. Now, unfortunately, we needed to provide more food. Well, we did absolutely need to provide more food, as was discussed by Henry Dimbley in the previous session over the last 50 years. And we used selection processes whereby we could grow food of a greater quantity from the same land and from the same inputs. We've been selecting for rapid growth and for appearance of produce on the supermarket shelves for the past 50 years. And a consequence of that is that we haven't been selecting for nutritional density. And in many of our fruits, vegetables, and grains, they actually have diminished. So there's been a 20 to 40% decrease on average in protein content, calcium, phosphorus, iron, riboflavin, and vitamin C over the past 50 years. Unfortunately, if we continue to increase the carbon dioxide concentration in the air, that will be compounded by up to an additional 50%, because carbon dioxide is the starting substrate for photosynthesis. We will have more carbohydrate-rich plants if we continue to increase the carbon dioxide concentrations. We obviously need to stop the increase in carbon dioxide, and we need to consider how we reverse the previous selection processes. And we may need to consider new breeding techniques that can do it more rapidly. We now can genetically engineer cereal seeds with increased fiber and minerals, tomatoes with more vitamin C and vitamin A. And we can produce camelina plants that not only produce the shorter chain omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acid, alpha-linoleic acid, but actually can produce the long chain, really beneficial omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids, DHA and EPA. Omega-3 deficiency actually results in 1.5 million deaths and 33 million DALYs annually. Why have we let this happen? We know that long-chain omega-3s are really good for protecting against heart attacks, strokes, cancer, diabetes, and improved brain health, both cognitive function and psychological health. So all of the guidelines internationally say we should be eating at least 250 milligrams of DHA and EPA. But how are we doing? In fact, less than 20% of the world eats this recommended amount, mainly from seafood. And in fact, when we do blood measurements of omega-3 levels in tissues such as red blood cells, the situation is even worse. So you can see actually in the map, if your eyesight is very, very good, that in the self-report of omega-3 intake in the upper panel, that the Republic of Ireland is in red. So that means that it's taking in less than 100 milligrams of DHA and EPA. But the UK is in the green, so that it's reporting that it is on average eating 250 milligrams of EPA and DHA. However, when we do blood levels in the UK, we're in the red. Very high risk. Our omega-3 levels in the red blood cells are less than 4% on average. Why is there a disparity? Well, unfortunately, many people think that by eating one oily fish portion per week, that they're getting enough DHA and EPA. This is a publication from Nature in 2016, which looks at the content of EPA and DHA in farmed Scottish Atlantic salmon. And it more than halved between 2006 and 2015, dropping from levels of, on average, around 2.8 grams per 100 gram down to about 1.2. Now, in fact, the 2019 data shows us that there's been a further drop in Scottish, Norwegian, and Irish farm salmon, down to, on average, 0.8 of a gram per 100 grams. Why has this happened? Well, with the rise of aquaculture, there's increasing demand for omega-3 feedstuffs. Usually that comes because the farm salmon and the farm trout don't make DHA and EPA. They have to be fed it. Usually that comes from the waste products of the wild fish catch, but that's now a scarce resource and therefore more expensive, and therefore less and less and less omega-3 is being fed to the salmon. The solutions are algae-sourced omega-3, which is currently expensive, or possibly genetically engineered camelina seed. We also need to address the fact that many people don't eat fish. Particularly children are not that fond of oily fish. It's key for their brain development as well as iron. DHA is really key for childhood brain function development. So we in Devonish actually have looked at, well, if the salmon get their omega-3 from being fed it, well, actually, can we feed it to chickens and therefore produce omega-3 enriched chicken meat and eggs? We definitely can increase levels in the tissue of chicken meat and within the eggs. We went further and we looked to see if that actually got into the humans, was bioavailable, and did some good. We did a randomized control trial. A quarter got control chicken meat and control eggs, 3 portions a week for 6 months. A quarter got the omega-3 enriched eggs, a quarter got the omega-3 enriched chicken meat, and a quarter got the dual enriched foods. The results. Eating both enriched foods for 6 months increased the red cell omega-3 index, so increased it by 1.7%. That's shown in the left bottom panel. There was a redistribution of the omega-3 index. There was a more than halving of those with a high-risk omega-3 index. And there was a drop in diastolic blood pressure of 3 millimeters of mercury. Each of those changes will be associated with a 15 to 25% reduction in cardiovascular events and total mortality. What we've achieved with enriching chicken meat and eggs is we now know we can recolor the world map from mainly red to more yellow and orange. We can get people to intermediate risk omega-3 index. If we're going to recolor the omega-3 map index totally green, we're going to need contributions from multiple sources. So we do want the wild oily fish, the farmed oily fish to make a contribution. We want to re-increase the levels of DHA and EPA in those fish. In order to provide choice, we should use naturally enriched meats and eggs. We can consider biofortified food coatings and supplements. However, the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids are very unstable. They have multiple double bonds. They're very subject to oxidant damage. They also, when they're not given within a whole food matrix, have problems of bioavailability. So we'll need to test whether we're doing some good with the biofortified foods and the supplements. At the moment, there is huge confusion concerning the food labeling of long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. So when I run my clinics and I say, listen, you need to increase your intake of oily fish and you need to make sure it's high quality, people ask me, how do I ensure that it's high quality? And there really is confusion in the labels. It's very difficult to explain to people how they get at least 2 grams per week into them. The UK led the system for the traffic light system, which summarises disadvantageous excesses. But we're not doing anything about promoting and advertising the beneficial ingredients in natural food. And I think that's really important for greater consumer awareness. We need to have an easily understood front-of-pack labelling system which may summarise nutrient density and also will provide details on the beneficial nutrients that are common deficiencies, such as omega-3, iron, and vitamin D. You can see that I actually didn't put contents down for bioavailable iron or vitamin D. And that's because we're going to have to work out, because the requirements for men and women are different. Women need more bioavailable iron. Iron that comes from animal sources is actually much more bioavailable because it's heme iron rather than free iron. Likewise, vitamin D, the D3 that comes from animal source foods is much more bioeffective, 5 times as potent as the D2 variant that comes from plant sources. We're going to actually have to address those complications, and we need to explain them simply to the average consumer. We now know that taxes on disadvantageous foods and subsidies for advantageous foods can change consumer behaviour. We can increase the intake of fruits and vegetables and reduce the amount of salt intake if we use taxes and subsidies effectively. And that can result in huge benefits. So this is a simulation study carried out by Tufts University researchers. And they worked out that a 30% subsidy on healthy foods, including seafood rich in omega-3s, fruit, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, being provided to those in the bottom half of the population could prevent 3.3 million cardiovascular events, a gain of 8.4 million healthy years of life, and could actually save billions in formal healthcare costs. So my suggestions are that we need to consider that a major reduction in ruminant agriculture, so as to solve greenhouse gas emissions, is very likely to harm human health. We need to optimise nutritional quality of unprocessed foods and sustainable agricultural practices using measurement and technology solutions from a wide range of disciplines. We need to promote greater consumer awareness of the health benefits of advantageous nutrients. And we need to consider interventions such as subsidies for sustainably produced nutritious foods and taxes or barriers to the disadvantageous foods that are commonly eaten to excess. Thank you very much for your attention.